Everyone, my name is Pastor James, one of the pastors at the Camarillo Church of the Nazarene. I just want to give you a few updates before we get started on what we're doing here. It's been about a month since we started the live service, the digital church, and it's been going really good. We feel like God's really called us to this, and we're working hard at it. I mean, almost every day we've got multiple people working on this. Our goal is that we could record our Sunday morning services and then create a digital service using the platform that you're on right now, the church online, and have a service there. However, we just continue to figure out ways not to do what we're doing. We've figured a lot out. We had a volunteer, Mike, big thank you to him for running Cat 6 cabling from our on our campus to establish a good connection, because that's been one of the major problems up to this point, has been really unstable wireless connection. So we got that figured out. Excuse me, digital sneeze. They usually come in threes, so fair warning. Okay. The second thing, we've been figuring out our software, so we've got that figured out. But we had to change computers last Sunday, and that caused some problems. So rather than me just not doing anything, I'm re-preaching this message for you guys online, because I too believe in what God's called us to do here. So here we are, and we're gonna keep working at this, and we expect it to get better and better. Let's get started. We're in this series on Kings, and we're looking at the first three kings of Israel and what they got right and what they got wrong. And today we're going to be looking at David and his victories. A lot of victories to choose from David. But since I feel like I only get a limited amount of time with you all, I wanted to make the most of that. And I want to talk about perhaps his greatest victory that would come to our minds would be Goliath. So a little bit about Goliath, just for perspective. The guy's tall, which is kind of an understatement. Says that he's just under 10 feet tall, which means if you put him on a basketball court, his head is going to be like right here under the rim. I mean, he's just massively tall. You put him on the team, it's going to look like an average-sized person. I mean, he's just huge. And then your arms outstretched, your arm span is equal to your height. So imagine he's like 10 feet tall, and he sticks his arms out, and he's 10 feet wide. It's just like we cannot. I think we can't. It's hard for us to even picture someone being that tall. We've seen like some really tall people in modern times, but usually these guys are like really skinny looking. But Goliath, he had to have like incredible muscle mass, because his armor weighed 125 pounds. The average American army person, their armor is like 45. I mean, 125, that's almost triple that. And that's just what he's walking around in. It's huge. And then we compare it to David. And most of us, when we think about David and Goliath and try to compare heights, we picture ourselves being David and Goliath being the 10-foot giant. But the average American male is just 6 feet, maybe just a little shy. But David would not have been 6 feet tall. In fact, the first century Jewish man we know was under 5 feet tall, which means David was probably even shorter, which means that David is below Goliath's hip. That's just like a huge difference between tiny David and enormous Goliath. just incredible. So I already talked about his armor. His spear is 12 feet long, 2 inches thick. The spear itself weighs 16 pounds. The tip of the spear is like the weight of a large bowling ball. I mean, imagine trying to balance that, a 12-foot pole with a bowling ball in the end. It actually sounds like a really fun game to me. But imagine trying to like throw that with any measure of accuracy. And now imagine that your opponent, it's like his weapon of choice, and he can hurl that thing across the field right at your head. Really intimidating, right? So he gets up there, and Goliath says this, pick a warrior, send him out, and we're going to fight to the death. And if he wins, we'll be your slaves. But if I win, you have to be our slaves. And when I first heard this in Sunday school, I was thinking, wow, that's really weird. That's a really different kind of battle that Goliath came up with to fight David. But it's not weird. I mean, it's weird to us, but it was actually pretty common back then to have a champion's battle. It's what they would refer to that as. And it was common for nations to not only engage in it, but respect that. So when he gets up there and he begins with this taunt and this challenge, everybody knows exactly what's going on because they know what a champion's battle is. And Goliath has been at this for about 40 days now. He's getting up there, he's taunting Israel, and he's mocking Israel's God for 40 days. That's a long time. And imagine camping out, waking up every morning, putting on all your armor, walking up to the edge of the hill, listening to this guy down in the valley make fun of you, make fun of your God, and then you're like, all right, see you tomorrow. Walking off, doing that over and over and over for 40 days. It's a weird thing, right? I mean, to imagine battle, it's like camping, only like you listen to someone yell at you from a field for a few minutes in the morning. What's interesting about that, because that's not technically true, chapter 17, if you want to read the story, it's 1 Samuel 17. Verse 24, it says that whenever the Israelites heard heard Goliath, they ran in fear. Picture that. It would be weird if everybody ran in fear, honestly. It would not strike me as odd if you walk out and you see this giant with this intense armor and weapons, and you hear his taunt for men to run in fear. But everybody to run in fear, and for them to do that every day for 40 days, that to me tells me there's something else going on here. There's like a spirit of fear that is settled over the camp of Israel. So David gets there, and David is delivering groceries for his dad to his brothers. He gives them bread, and then his dad says, give their commanding officers cheese. Apparently, cheese was a big deal. He brings them cheese, and it's a bribe. I love my sons. If you want to see this cheese keep coming, you're going to keep them away from the front lines. So David gets there after delivering these groceries, and he hears Goliath down there in this valley taunting Israel, mocking God. And his first response is in verse 26, where he says, what would be done for the man who kills this Philistine? Which when you read that it sounds weird. Like, my first question would be like, well, who's going to do something about this? Or how are we going to fight this guy? Or when is this going to happen? And if I was super brave, it would be, can I go? The last question that I would think would be, so what do I get if I beat him? But, and this is why David thinks this, he says, he knows that what a champion's battle is. And he also knows that it's common for the victor, the winner of the champion's battle, to one, keep his life. That's pretty awesome. Two, keep his freedom. Also pretty awesome. But three, he gets a prize from the king for winning, for saving the nation. So these champions, they would, depending on the size of the battle and the victory, would actually acquire some really great wealth. So he knows the deal, which is why he says, "So what's the prize?" It's almost like if you're a boxer and you get offered a really big marquee ticket prize fight, right? Maybe not even the championship fight, but you offered a big prize. One of your questions is going to be, how much do I win? What's the prize? That's David's question. Then he goes on to say, this Philistine, this disgrace from Israel, and David is not just interested in what he gets out of it. He is genuinely offended for God and for Israel, and he is just visibly upset that Goliath has the audacity to make fun of God and to disgrace Israel. So they share with him. Well, the winner gets Saul's daughter, Michal, the very gorgeous princess, to be his wife. Which also, what happens when you marry a princess? You get royal status. Very cool. You also get a fortune, a big pile of cash, and you get tax-free. That's huge, right? Imagine paying like less than half of what it costs for gas when you go to the pump, or not paying sales tax when you buy stuff, or not having property tax. It's like living in Oregon and Washington and all the best tax places you can at the same time. I remember when I lived up north on the Washington border, people left to live in Washington because it has better property tax, but they would go into Oregon because there was no sales tax. So they're trying to get the best deal, but there's still tax everywhere. We know we've got 30 to 50% of our income goes for tax. Imagine being tax-free. Huge. So David's offended for God. He's looking for a deal. And Saul hears out about it. And he calls him in his tent, and he starts putting his armor on David. And I just think, like, Saul, what are you doing? This guy's a kid. You're going to send him out to Goliath? Like, from a logical perspective, this is a really bad idea. You're going to lose, right? From a spiritual perspective, you're betting on God, which makes me wonder why Saul isn't out there. If he's willing to put David on the battle lines, why isn't he willing to go? Because if he believes that God is going to be victorious, he should be out there. If God is going to defend Israel and all the other men are too chicken to stand up for God, then you do it. You're the king. That's your job, right? God is going to protect. God's going to protect you if his will is to save you, right? Typically, when Israel went into battle, they asked God, are you going to go with us? Will you protect us? Will you give us this battle? And if God said no, then they didn't go off to fight. They did their best to make peace. They paid tribute. If God said yes, then they went in. This scenario, they are paralyzed with fear. Fear had taken their eyes off of God and put them on the problem. Fear takes your eyes off of God and puts it on the problem, and it also takes your eyes off of God and puts it on you. And you begin to realize how inadequate you are, and you begin to fear what you are going to lose. I'm going to lose my life. I'm going to lose my money. I'm going to lose my relationships. I'm going to lose my marriage, my whatever. You cannot live from a place of, what am I going to lose? That's fear. Instead, we fix our eyes on what's eternal, which is what has empowered Christians to be able to face some really impossible tasks, even like the Christians who gave their lives in the Colosseum, because they looked at what was eternal, not what they were going to lose here and now. That's what Paul said. For me, go ahead, kill me. Live as Christ, die as gain. You kill me, and I get to go be with Jesus. You let me live, and I'm going to keep breathing the gospel down your necks of the Pharisees. I will not stop preaching the gospel, and you lose. I win either way. That's because Paul was looking at the eternal. He wouldn't allow the fear of losing his life, the fear of punishment, the fear of losing his reputation or anything to distract him. To Saul's credit, though, back to Saul, he did wonder, are you sure? Are you sure you're up for this? And David had to convince him a little bit. Not that hard, but I fought a bear. I fought a lion. God help me with those things. He's going to give this to me. I got this, right? So Saul gets a little bit of credit. Saul puts him, though, in his armor. And Saul, we know, is a head and shoulders taller than everybody else. So you got Saul, head and shoulders taller. David, shorter, putting on that armor. It's going to be huge and bulky, and he's not going to be able to move in it. David has the wisdom to say, I have to fight my battles in my own armor, and I have to fight my battles with the weapons that God has given me. And he even says, God has trained me and shaped me by the experiences that he's given me, fighting the bear, fighting the lion, which is true in our lives. The battles that we face today shape us for our warfare tomorrow. Does that make sense? In the New Testament, the principle is, if you can be trusted with little, you can be trusted with much. The lessons that you learn in your life from your trials develop your character and perseverance and hope, which empower you to use those things for future conflicts. Does that make sense? Okay. 1 Samuel 17:45, David gets out there when he faces Goliath. And I love the Message translation. He says, David says to Goliath, you come at me with sword and spear and battle axe. Battle axe. How cool is that? I come at you with the name of God of the angel armies, the God of Israel's troops, from who you curse and mock. I love that. You know what that means? David's got his sling. It's like a piece of leather. It's like a leather belt almost, with a little pouch in the middle for the rock. What's going on with his belt and 5 stones he just picked out of the river? But David knows that that is not his weapon. Verse 45, chapter 17, tells us, you're coming at me with a sword and a spear and a battle axe, but my weapon is God himself. And that is the perspective we need for every battle. My battle is not my communication tools. It's not my lawyer. It's not my 401k. It's not, my doctors or my whatever. Our weapons of this warfare are God himself. He's the one that fights my battles for me. And when we rest in the presence of God, it empowers him to fight on our behalf. I think it's really important that we know our weapons, we know what we're fighting with, that we're confident with that, and that we're willing to look for, when we get into the battle, what's really happening here, right? In every battle, there's always an escape clause. God said, I will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, and I will always provide a way out for you. So when things get to heat up, you either say, I'm staying in this because I know that if there's no escape plan, I'm making it through this. I'm not going to fall into temptation. Or you find the escape route and you take it. God will provide one of those two things, the strength to go forward or the escape out. There's provision in every battle. Psalms 23, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. How cool is that? That in the midst of your intense warfare, in the midst of whatever trial, tribulation that you're going through, whether it's relational, financial, health, whatever, God has prepared a table of provision in your presence and in the presence of your enemies. When you feel like the world is closing in around you, God is sitting next to you with this plate, and he's like, let's eat. Eating is probably the last thing that we think about when we're in the middle of battle, which is what makes God so funny, right? That he picks the worst times for to say, like, how about we snack? I just think it's so cool, and there's something amazing about sitting in the eye of the storm and just, sharing a really good tri-tip with God, right? You've experienced that, where you feel like everything's falling apart, but man, my devotional times are so good. Preparing a table. The things that he feeds us are things like peace that surpasses understanding, because if it didn't surpass understanding, then we wouldn't be able to have it for times that we didn't understand it, right? I shouldn't be at peace right now because everything's going on in my life, therefore I don't have peace. But his peace surpasses our understanding, which is why you could say, oh, I should be really anxious right now, but I just feel the peace of God in my life. Or just like unceasing joy that turns mourning into dancing, where sometimes you're just like, I should not be laughing right now, but man, I just have like this joy inside of me. I think it's really common to hear people laughing at Christian funerals because the Holy Spirit comes and he mourns with us, but he also brings joy with him too. And it's not either or. Sometimes it's just this mixture of sorrow and joy at the same time. So one more thing. 1 Samuel 18, the next chapter. David wins. He beats Goliath, and it's kind of gruesome, but I think it's cool for the men, so I'm going to share it. He takes his sling, first shot, hits Goliath right in the forehead. Goliath falls over dead. Then he goes over, he picks up his sword, which had to be like huge and heavy, and he cuts off Goliath's head. It's just like kind of gruesome, right? But he cuts it off, and you can just like picture him like holding it up to the Israelite army, and it would have been like this massive head. It was probably like a two-hander kind of lift, right? And then he keeps Goliath's sword, which is so cool. In fact, later in the story, when he's on the run from Saul, and he's hungry and he's with his troops, and the priest, he says, do you have any food? The priest says, no, but got this holy bread you can eat as long as you're pure. And he says, good, I'll take it. Of course I am. And then he says, do you have any weapons? And he says, well, I have Goliath's sword. And David says, give it to me, for there is none like it. Which leads to this thought. Chapter 18, verse 7. David's on the victory, parade home, and people are lining the streets and they're chanting, Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. Which is not true, because David has only slain one. Just one, Goliath, right? I mean, you could include a bear and a lion, but that would then be 3 if you're including animals. So why are they chanting David has killed his tens of thousands? It's because David had occupied his enemy's title. Goliath was the one who had slayed tens of thousands. And because David beat Goliath, David is the one who slayed the slayer of tens of thousands. This is like in boxing, when in order to be the heavyweight champion, you don't have to beat every heavyweight boxer. You just have to beat the one guy who has the title champion, and you become the heavyweight champion. You take the title from the person that you beat. You not only take their title, you take their their weapons, right? David got Goliath's sword. The same thing is true for us. When the enemy tries to bring us into destruction, right? And he will use anything to steal, kill, and destroy us. Like, for example, alcohol or abuse. But when by God's grace, we discover freedom from those things, whether that's like freedom in an instant, which is pretty rare, but it does happen, where people just get cured. Most of the time, especially with addictions, people have to come out of that crawling on their hands and knees, surrounded by their friends, to help them find freedom and then walk in freedom, which is like really what the whole like point of AA meetings are, that you have people to help you walk in freedom. People come crawling out of that, and then they stand up, and then they go back into it to find someone else who's just stuck, and they pick them up and they walk them out. It's like what the enemy uses and has designed for your destruction. When you defeat the enemy at that place, you occupy his title and you occupy his weaponry, and it allows you to become a master of the thing that was meant for your destruction. And then you go and you have now inherited the ministry of walking back into the places where you were once wounded and hurt, and helping others that are going through the same thing to walk out of that. People who are alcoholics are the best sponsors for current alcoholics. I know that with alcoholism, they always say they're always an alcoholic, and I understand why. It's to prevent the mindset that I don't have to worry just because I haven't, had a drink for 10 years doesn't mean I don't have to worry anymore. You have to stay vigilant that once you have a problem, you're going to always have a problem. But I would say, like, you can have victory and you can have your identity changed in Christ. But part of your identity also becomes someone who can go back into the mud and pick people up and help them and lift them out. And it's why people that struggle with alcohol are so good at helping people who struggle with alcohol out, right? People who have crawled out are the best people to go back in and help others crawl out. It works with just like everything, relationships, marriages, abuse, gambling, sexual purity issues. It's not just how it works. I think it's the blessing of God that allows us the grace and the freedom to go walk in and help others out. So when David fought, you've got to think that David fought this battle really because no one else was. And I think anybody else could have, because of God's intention to save Israel, that he wanted to provide an escape from the Philistines. David just happened to be the only person willing to take a risk and say, I believe that God is going to be with me. And the lesson there for us is to learn that when we walk with God, we know we walk with God. There are times and opportunities where we could be walking on our own, and we shouldn't make the assumption that we're walking with God. But when we are abiding with Christ, and when our relationship is where it should be with Christ, the places that he leads us, we know that there's a purpose in that, and that there's going to be victory there, right? That victory isn't always like prosperity and health and all that kind of stuff. I mean, sometimes the victory is in the loss, right? The Christians in the first century who laid down their lives. Paul said, to die is gain, right? To live as Christ, to die is gain. David also had a promise, though, too. I'm going to be the next king of Israel. I've been anointed king, and I'm not king yet. So it's incredibly stupid to get into a death match with somebody who has an unfulfilled promise of God in their life. David understood this. So I would just challenge you to just pay attention to your experiences and how God's shaping you and how he's teaching you and coaching you on what it means to walk in him and to fight through your trials and your tribulations. Know the weapons that he's giving you, the provisions that are in each warfare, how to stand your ground in the battle, and to just fight the good fight, and know that God is with you. And I would challenge you, some of us need to just pray, God, I need to recharge for this battle I'm in. Help me, give me new perspective, draw me into your presence. Some of us need to do something and actually change our tactics. I have been going about fighting this battle, this challenge, this trial all wrong. I need to start living differently. I need to start making different choices. I need to start saying things different. I need to start walking closer with God. Some of us need to just claim that I'm going to fight the good fight. I'm going to look at things from God's perspective. I'm going to fight with his blessing and his armor, his warfare. I'm going to fight for his kingdom, his purposes, his principles, his intentions. So that's it. I really want to thank you guys for joining us today. We have a fall revival coming up October, middle of October. I think it's the 14th through the 16th off the top of my head. So I'll comment on that. But we have a guest speaker. It's going to be really great. And we're going to try to share as much of that resource as we can. So the middle of October, you just look for a lot of content that we're going to share that I think is really going to bless you. If you go to camnaz.org, we've birthed this digital church. So we have a digital service where we share this content. We also have a Tuesday night Bible study / small group where you join in a video chat. It's a different tool that we use, and it allows everybody to see everybody, to know and be known, just like a real small group. Like a real small group, like a in-person small group. It is a real small group. And if you don't want people to see you, you don't have to turn your camera on. You can just watch other people. And if you don't want to talk, you can just share through a chat feature. And then when you feel ready, you can turn on your microphone and your camera and join the community. So that's tomorrow night. And we also have places for you to volunteer and get involved and do ministry online. We have a place for you to give online. If you're visiting, if you're just watching this one time, please don't give. We don't need your money. If this message is a thing where you feel like this is your primary place that you're going to church, then we'd love to offer you that opportunity for you to give. If you're going to another church and you're doing this, please give to your other church. Give to the one that you're going to. They may need your money. And it's not that we don't need money. It's just that we know that our provider is, it's the Lord. And he's asked us to do this, and we just know he's going to provide. So we want to enable people to give who feel God's leading them to. And those that don't, you don't need to. So if you, to see all of this, go to camnaz.org and click on the digital campus. And that's where you can see how to get to our small groups and volunteer and our service online and all of that. And we'd love to connect with you. Have a great day. Have a great night. Praying for you. And Let's keep being the church.